What's up everyone and welcome to a bit of a Melee 3.0 first look and an initial thoughts video, and boy is it gonna be an interesting one, because so far I've got a lot of thoughts on it. So we've been waiting for phase 2 of Melee 3.0 to come out for a very long time now, and this is by far the biggest lump of changes. Stance changes, melee juggling, stat changes, changes to key mods are just some of the changes. So how do I feel it's worked out so far? Well, to be perfectly honest, not particularly well, and I have quite a few things to say about it all, so strap in, sit back, it could be a long one. So let's start with taking a look at a couple of key mods from before: Blood Rush, Condition Overload, and Maiming Strike. These three caused a huge amount of discussion, and well, as such are basically the most important ones to look at now. Let's start with Condition Overload. The biggest change to this is that it's now additive rather than multiplicative. So it works essentially like Prime Pressure Point rather than multiplying the damage done. Not only that, but it's not capped at all, so the more procs you have on an enemy, the more damage you're doing. 3 procs would be 360%, for example. It's 120% per proc on the enemy. So this combines insanely well with a secondary weapon like a Rattle Guts to proc a whole bunch of things. This has a couple of weird effects on how melee feels now. For a start, it's meant that actually on weapons that have guaranteed procs in the stance or have a decent status chance, it's actually worth dropping Prime Pressure Point for Condition Overload. Because, well, after 2 status procs, Condition Overload is better, and running both this and Prime Pressure Point is kind of pointless when you could be running something more relevant like a mod that multiplies your damage like a Gladiator mod. So this means that on weapons that proc reliably, so long to Prime Pressure Point. But this change also has the clearly unintended effect of making pure status weapons feel absolutely awful. Pure status weapons were relying on just how strong Condition Overload was to be able to still compete with crit weapons. With this change, they just feel ridiculously weak and don't come even close to crit anymore. The big winner from the Condition Overload changes was the crit meta, which just got even further reinforced as the way to go when it comes to high level melee. Blood Rush is also additive now, and seems to only work from the unmodded crit chance of the weapon. Took a fair amount of testing to figure this out, but eventually did figure it out. It does still work off of the combo counter too, which is vastly easier to stack with the new system. The mod hasn't changed really, however, and is still going to be a staple mod on literally every crit build you're going to run on your weapons. The mechanics have changed, but the usage really hasn't. Maiming Strike was also changed to only work on your base crit chance and also be a stacking buff like Blood Rush is. This also means that the combo with Blood Rush is dead. Before, Blood Rush would stack from total crit chance, so the base plus your maiming and then work from that. Now, however, since they're both additive and both work from the base, they don't work together anywhere near as well as they used to. The stacking buff does go up from 90% to 150% to compensate, but honestly, as it stands, the old slide builds are pretty much dead now. Covert Lethality's changed to initial combo and then finisher damage, basically killed off that mod entirely. Combo isn't hard to stack at all, so having an initial combo amount really means kind of basically next to nothing, especially with the crazy attack speed that all daggers have. The additional finisher damage isn't bad, but honestly, you could probably go with something way more useful with that slot that can boost your finisher damage, like higher crit or more elemental damage. So honestly, the days of Covert Lethality being a go-to mod on your daggers are gone. So I guess these are the key mods I really wanted to talk about. Obviously there are other mods that might merit some talking about, but we can't talk about them all. So let's take a look at a couple of the new mechanics so far. Let's start with the floating mechanic. Basically, this is the use of the Titania float mechanic to put the enemy in the air so we can wail on them while they're floating. And well, honestly, it feels kind of awful. The main problem is the same problem you have with Titania, especially the augment she has to boost her melee damage. Those floating enemies aren't fixed to the spot, so you know what ends up happening: they float out of melee range. What's the point of a mechanic that allows them to go out of melee range? You bump them once with your melee, the enemies start drifting, and then all of a sudden you can't hit them anymore. Or you do something with a slam and they fly off into the middle of nowhere, miles out of range. And this ties nicely into something else, the stances. So many of the stances make use of this floating mechanic, and while the floating is like it is, I can't say I like many of the stances. They're all tied so heavily in with one another, that because the floating mechanic is so counterintuitive to melee, it means that many of the stances just feel awful to me. This actually could be extremely easily fixed. While they're floating in the air, they don't move, they stay exactly where they are, unless something like an outside force, like an ability or an arcane, physically pulls them in. If they stop floating off on their own accord, maybe a lot of these stances, as well as this feature, would feel a lot better. But right now, I'm actually avoiding this in literally any way that I can. Funny thing is, though, that honestly, the way the stances are right now, even with this floaty feature, it doesn't feel too bad with super high attack speed weapons. It feels like something that's really hurting slow attack speed ones. Zors are actually a very good way of seeing this. Put a super high attack speed but low base damage or lower base damage Zor against one that is slower but has better base damage, the high attack speed one comes out on top every single time, which is actually pretty much the opposite to the way that it used to be before the change. Hence why in the past all my Zors were the slower ones. But I can say that now I am going to be rebuilding every single one of my Zors for speed. But that's not all I've got to say about stances. A lot of the whole W and melee combos, the forward combos, have too much forward momentum. And since Warframe does a kind of a poor job of keeping your melee actually on target, specifically at an enemy, you often slide past the enemy and have to try and spin your camera around to try and melee the enemy again. This is by far the worst on the fist weapons, but happens with almost all of the hold W combos. But then this means you often avoid those hold W combos and just use the spam E. But now you're kind of rooted to the spot in a game like Warframe, which is all about being mobile all the time. It's a fast-paced game, slumming it down because the mobile stances are either awkward or rely on that floating mechanic or have some weird animation that sort of locks you in an animation mid-combo. It's not a particularly good change. But then we have the removal of like the block cancel, the replacement of that with the dodge cancel. Previously, blocking and waiting a second would end a combo and allow you to restart, to avoid attacks basically that you really disliked. Now to do that now, you have to physically roll or wait considerably longer, which not only takes longer to do, but is clunkier as well because it puts you out of position all the time. It's not too much of an issue with the longer combos, but with the short ones where you only want a couple of attacks of the combo, it becomes a very big pain really quickly. We also have input buffering, which is messing with the combos too. For example, if you want to do the E combo and not the whole W and E, the forward combo, if you were moving forward before, because of the input buffering, you end up doing the forward W combo instead of the standard E that you were trying to do. And the same thing happens with blocking as well, both of which end up making things feel awkward and clunky and out of your control. And then we have the fact that the heavy attack was moved off of hold E and onto middle mouse button. This honestly makes both the gunblades and the glaives feel way clunkier than they did before, and really not that good to use whatsoever. And it's not configurable either, so you can't just have it back the way that you had it before. I would love to see at least this become an option once again. I'd also love the option for using lower ranked stances to mean something again, so that I can avoid combos that I really dislike. It's actually something I used quite a bit in the past, but it's not something that actually you can do now. Now, I know that was a lot of talk about the stances, but honestly, all of the changes and the lack of control from either input buffering or the removal of the block cancel means that the stances aren't actually a lot of the problem with how melee is feeling right now. And it becomes the most effective way to use melee right now in a very mobile game like Warframe is by using the least mobile attacking combos in the stance, because the others are just not that great to use. And that brings us on to heavy attacks, which is the replacement for the charge attack. Honestly, I don't really see that much use in them outside of the gunblades. The damage from them isn't worth the wind-up time, or completely destroying your entire combo counter for. because unless you've got efficiency on there, you use up your entire combo. And I can already hear, just use efficiency mods. In what mod space though? Blood Rush got nuked, Condition Overload got nuked. The mod slot that we gained from switching out Prime Pressure Point from Condition Overload is needed for more raw damage mods to basically counter the changes in the damage of the weapons, rather than heavy attack efficiency. Going for a hard reset on your Blood Rush every time you want to do a heavy attack is a hard no from me. You almost are always better off keeping your Blood Rush stacked and unleashing that flurry of light blows rather than sacrificing it all for the heavy. Not to mention the fact that, honestly, the heavy attack doesn't do that much damage on a heavily armoured target unless you've already beaten the enemy to a pulp with corrosive proccing light attacks. By which time, when you actually want to use your heavy attack, it's likely to be a complete waste to actually use it. All in all, I don't think I'm going to end up using anything other than a crit build with Condition Overload. Condition Overload, getting the nuking it did, status weapons just feel awful. Which is a shame, because in the video I did the other day talking about my plans for this update, I expected that not much would change with the builds, and, well, yeah, I mean it has, but not for the better. We lost almost entirely pure status builds as being a viable endgame build, and has made melee scale way worse than it did before. We've actually ended up with, I'm gonna say, basically one real viable build for high level content now. That's not a good situation to be in at all. At least before we had probably like 4. Maybe the rage mode is gonna be what sort of ties it all together, but for now, I think we lost overall melee power and we lost build diversity. Now, I have to admit, with all this criticism, it would be unlike me to try and offer some suggestions for what I would love to see change, and what I think could turn this around a little bit. For the heavy attacks, I would love to see the cost reduced to maybe 3 tiers of the combo. This would mean that it becomes an actual part of your normal melee, attacking rotation, rather than being a complete reset to 0 every time you use it. Especially since, realistically, we don't have the mod space to try and fit efficiency mods in there. Buff the glaive's throwing mechanic. Right now, the detonation is the only one that does any real damage at all, and not the actual throw itself. The glaives have the potential for a really interesting mechanic in that throw, but it's just wasted because it does so little damage, and it's just never going to get used. I'd also love to see the way stances work change a little bit. I would love to see be able to customize the stances based on the stances you have so far, to reflect your Warframe's knowledge of that weapon. So say for example, you love the W combo from Vengeful Revenant, the E combo from Crimson Dervish, and the right click closer of Iron Phoenix. You use your knowledge of that weapon class to combine that into a combo you use. Personalizing your combo, this would give greater control to the player over how they want to play, while still making the grind for the stances relevant. But this would also allow players to avoid combos that they dislike and focus on those that do. But this would also give clear feedback to DE as to which of these combos are the ones people are specifically avoiding and actually need a bit of a look at. And then there's just working on removing animation locks from combos. Animation locks in a melee system feel, quite frankly, weird. And in such a mobile game like Warframe, where the enemies try and back away if they're anything but infested, animation locked combos feel very, very weird and very clunky. I would definitely love to see those go. So that's pretty much my whole feedback on this Stage 2 of Melee 3.0 so far. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. Do you agree with me? Do you think I've overlooked something that actually makes certain things good? These are my initial thoughts, albeit after a ton of testing, but maybe I missed something, so let me know and I will take a look. But for now, many thanks for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'm going to head back into hunting my Lich so I can get that Dubber Stubber and test out how that feels. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video and sub for some more Warframe content, and I shall catch you in the next one.